everyone, it's Amber. So today I'm going to be talking about anxiety. I kind of broke it down into how it works in my head, clarifying some aspects that might not be as familiar to everyone. So I just want to explain that and how I process anxiety. Not saying this is how everyone processes anxiety, even though that's how I'll be referencing it. Um, so I'm just going to jump right into it and tell you about it, and then we'll break it down after. Um, and then just it's written very wordily with many words. It is written with many words on the screen behind the camera, so I'm going to be looking off to the side as I read it. So just bear with my lack of eye contact as well. So anxiety. Anxiety happens when we realize terrible things in the world can easily happen to ourselves and those we love. Our body, including our mind, goes into fight, flight, or freeze in efforts to protect ourselves from pain. Anxiety provides a sense of control as we take all possibilities of pain into account. Then we get anxiety, panicked, repetitive overthinking, and efforts to minimize the chance of something terrible happening again to us or someone we love, to the extent that we subconsciously believe we are capable of minimizing it to the point where it cannot happen because we've considered all the possible threats and adjusted our lives accordingly. A problem that enters here is that if we truly recognize all of the possible threats and try to make a decision based on them, there is no possible way to avoid those threats, as each choice has some consequences. However, anxiety sees every threat as equally terrifying because anxiety isn't trying to logically make the best choice with the least amount of pain, but rather anxiety is trying to avoid pain altogether. Since anxiety sees no option available that would result in zero pain, it tries to then play with other factors and identify which other factors would need to change in order for us to choose the best option with no pain as a result. Occasionally, a circumstance can be changed that would result in no foreseeable pain. But if this isn't the case, anxiety then overwhelms our brain because there are now too many factors, including those outside of our control, that we are trying to take into account so we can make a decision. This is also where a counselor can help walk through, identify, and narrow down the threats to only include those we can control, because being this far in, all factors are perceived to be the same amount of controllable. This is because, once again, we are trying to produce zero pain. So everything that could produce pain, controllable or not, is to be avoided to the same extent, even if we can't actually avoid it. And since we must avoid it, we also have to consider it to be just as controllable as the threats that are actually controllable in order for this method to work. In order to avoid something that is unavoidable, we must make it controllable. By having the guidance of a counselor, we can eliminate the non-controllable threats from our control and make the decision based on our priorities and the realistic negative ramifications of suffering through the consequences of the options that are not our priorities. Now, anxiety has this over-the-top process for every decision, large and small, which is why it's important to give step-by-step tools of how to do this on a person's own accord in their own mind so they don't get caught in this unnecessary mental process for every decision and will eventually be able to use these tools with ease. In my experience, people with anxiety take longer to make decisions due to this mental hoop jumping and long process to get into the mindset of a decision-making person without anxiety. People with anxiety can be good at seeing solutions beyond the obvious ones because of this system. Since there are too many factors and all options can result in pain, the person quits making a decision. They quit until someone else chooses for them. Their lack of decision creates a decision, example, missing a deadline, so now there is no choice, or they become so stressed that they make a decision. The final option can be based on what they think someone around them would like them to choose, so that even if it results in pain, at least they still have someone who loves them. Since to someone with anxiety, love is based on the absence of pain. If they attempted to make someone happy and avoid pain from their loved one's perspective, they can have a better chance at still being loved, even if it was ultimately the worst option to choose. Since anxiety is based on considering all possible pain based on choosing any option, decisions are based on fears rather than positive influence. And since the fears are of any pains, all fears are seen as equal. In order to decide which fear is worse, instead of a person's intuition or logic going back and forth, it's the person's fears. Fears argue with each other. So that's my summary of anxiety in terms of what goes on in my head when I feel anxiety or anxious about making a decision and what that process looks like. I thought I was the only person that experienced anxiety in this way, But I was talking with a friend who shared that that the fact that fears argue with each other in a person with anxiety's mind resonated with her as well. And then I realized, like, wow, like this is a conclusion that expands. So I wrote a little bit more about it. I have not talked to anyone with anxiety about this to see if it resonates with them as well. But I did want to share it with you because just because I don't know someone who it resonates with doesn't mean that someone else doesn't resonate it with outside of my sphere. Doesn't resonate with it outside of my sphere. And then, so after that summary of anxiety and what goes on in my head, there's a couple options that have come through and been suggested and have been helpful to me. So one is an anxiety timeout. So not whenever, because I don't always have the option, but when I have anxiety, I put myself in an anxiety timeout. So I'll go sit in the corner and freely, like by sitting in the corner, I'm not punishing myself for having anxiety, but I'm giving myself the space to step out of a situation physically and mentally and say, like, okay, this right now is your time and space to have anxiety. So I go through my mental processes, my hoop jumping, my long process, and I basically freak out, about whatever is happening. And I realize that by sitting there, I can then recognize when I start cycling again. So with anxiety, because every fear is so big and equal and is to be avoided regardless of which decision it's abided by or how severe the result actually is, they tend to repeat because we're still going through the cycle looking for a way for the anxiety not to repeat, like looking for a solution. So we just keep repeating it to see if there's something we're missing or an option that we're not seeing right away in order to eliminate negative consequences. So by sitting in a corner or against a wall or just somewhere where I'm secluded from what I was just doing, I'm able to jump through those hoops, work through that mentally. I found that it helps me recognize when I start cycling again. And then once I realize I start cycling, I can say, like, okay, now that I've come full circle and identified all the possible consequences and my fears, let's like list them. So like, okay, in this situation, this, and this are my fears that come with this, and this choice. Good. Like, and then I can go through controllable. So like, okay, out of these 3 fears, which of them are actually controllable? Like, in what situations can I actually manipulate it so it's within my control? I might give an example if I can think of one. But so then I say, like, okay, are these fears controllable? Can I change something in this circumstance, in this choice, to make the fears go away? And then yes or no. If so, then I work through that process. And then the next one, like, okay, this is my fear, and this is the choice that goes along that creates that fear. Is there something I can control here? And then the next one. If I realize there's nothing I can do to control it, I basically have to pick my fear, which is the worst thing ever. And that's why people with anxiety often hit a wall where they don't make decisions, because it's so difficult, because you're choosing your fate and you're assuming that more negative consequences are also associated with it. And because every negative consequence is equally bad, you're trying to avoid all of them to the same extent, which it's just very hard to sort through. And then it's also easier to identify the time I spend being anxious or in that cycle, because when I'm sitting there not doing anything else, it's easy to be like, okay, like I want to get up, I want to do something, so I need to like finish this so I can make a decision and come to a conclusion so I can go about my life, because often we have anxiety while we're doing other things, or we're sitting there hating ourselves for having anxiety, which prolongs anxiety even more. Classic. A little self-inflicted pain for you. And so it's easier to identify how much time you spend in that anxiety cycle. I say cycle. I don't know if it's as cyclical as I think it is, but I'm saying cycle for just to explain the time spent there. And then since time and space is devoted to spending time in the cycle, you're more aware of the time you begin to waste, since you can't be distracted by other things or actions. So I think I already spoke to that. And then it gives you permission it gives permission to yourself to worry, and so you don't have to feel anxious about feeling anxious, which is the same thing I said. Like, you are absolutely free to worry, and it gives you space to do so. And knowing that once you take yourself out of that timeout and back into the world, give yourself permission to go back to the anxiety timeout anytime you feel like you need to revisit it and work through some more anxieties. Like, that's totally legal and fine. Like, do that, because then you don't feel like you have to sit there to figure everything out. You know you can come back anytime. And then here's some other solutions beyond changing the thought process. Thinking through, like, what are the consequences of making the wrong decision? So because I have anxiety and try to avoid negative consequences, I also tend to do that with other people. So if I see a negative consequence of one of their actions, I try to forewarn them from it. So I also do that with myself. And so I ask myself, like, so with other people, I say, like, when I'm trying to forewarn them, like, how bad is the consequence? Like, if I tell them, like, make sure your water bottle cap is screwed on all the way, the negative consequence of that is just, like, them losing some water or them getting wet. And if we're outside playing and there's more water inside, it's not a huge deal. But let's say, like, we're on a bike ride and we have a long time for the bike ride to continue, then that might be a little bit more of a big deal because you can't really waste that water. So just kind of looking at the consequences before you speak up to someone else helps you realize what consequences are actually severe in your own life. So it's like, if you make this decision, are those consequences, like, actually livable? Like, is that actually a big deal? And then also start somewhere, even if it's wrong. Like, when you have anxiety, it's so much easier to just not start because you don't want to be wrong. But if you just start somewhere and realize that you're wrong, then that's okay, and you can often change your mind, or you just learn from it and not do that in the future. And then also, when you just start somewhere, you might go down the wrong path. Like, that might not have been the best option. But by going down the wrong path, we will be guided to discover the right path. Because otherwise you just sit there and don't make any decisions, and you have no better idea of what the right or wrong path would be unless you start. And then once you start, it's easier to kind of be like, wow, like, this was not the right choice for me. Or like, wow, like, this was a great choice for me. Like, I'm glad I didn't do this other thing because this has these great benefits I didn't see until I was in the moment. So those are just some other thoughts I've had on solutions as a loose term to anxiety. I think those are just more like in the moment tools maybe to get through it. I just want to share that with you. Yeah. If we have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments. Let me know also in the comments if you see the same process in your own mind, because I'm not sure if other people do, but at least if we feel not so alone in this, I think that would be helpful. Also, let me know down in the comments if someone is watching this and doesn't have anxiety, tell me how you make decisions. Like, what does your brain look like? Because I have no idea. To summarize, like, for me, I see someone, as in myself, with anxiety, being based on considering all possible pain and choosing any option or decisions based on pain rather than anything else. Like, I base my decisions based on, like, what pain I will suffer, to what extent, and avoiding it. So how do you make decisions? Do you base it on pain, or do you base it on joy, or do you base it, I just don't know. So just tell me, because I'm just so curious as to what your experience is, and possibly even, like, giving a goal toward what I want my experience to look like in making decisions. Like it if this was helpful or informative that other people experience it, even if you don't. Subscribe to my channel if you want more information like this, or just more life information, because we're just journeying through together. So until next time.